welcome to UWO Now. I'm your host, Wendell Ray. Thanks so much for joining us for another conversation with a member of our UWO community. An article in U.S. News & World Report reads, U.S. colleges are facing a laundry list of challenges that affect their financial viability, from higher education operating expenses and downward enrollment trends to shaky state support, shriveling endowments, and a crisis in public confidence. In Wisconsin, the state has seen more than its share of campus closures and cutbacks. What does all of this mean for current and future students? Here to discuss higher education trends and challenges is Ed Martini, Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at UWO. Provost, welcome to UWO Now. Thanks for coming and talking to us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's good to be with you.
First, let's do this. Let's define what a provost is. I know, there are academics who are listening to us and they have a good understanding of what that is. But for people who are not employed in higher education, tell us what a provost is and what your responsibilities are on a campus.
Sure. So the provost, the easiest definition is that you're the chief academic officer of the institution. And that role changes a little bit institution to institution. But here in Wisconsin, and particularly here at UWO, I serve as both the provost and the vice chancellor for academic affairs, which are technically kind of two separate but interrelated jobs. So just like we have other vice chancellors over student affairs and finance and administration who oversee the day-to-day management and operations of those divisions, I oversee all of the academic affairs activities. So the colleges, all of our courses and scheduling, anything related to our core academic teaching, learning, and research mission. But as provost here, I also serve as the number two to the chancellor. So when the chancellor needs me to step in for him or he's off on vacation for a week, the provost is designated by us and by Wisconsin statute as being sort of the number two in charge as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Let's talk about some trends and challenges in higher education. What is happening, if there is anything happening? I know we've been experiencing some things here in Wisconsin. But is that symbolic, or are we in a similar path that other institutions are facing across the country? Are we talking about trends, or are we just talking about something that is unique to Wisconsin?
Yeah, great question. So it's definitely not unique to UWO. It's definitely not unique to Wisconsin. Higher education in general across the country is facing the biggest upheaval we've seen in 50 years, since the 1970s, potentially longer than that, maybe since World War II. And the combination of factors that are driving that, there are multiple ones, and some of those are different when we look at what's really the driver across the country. In some regions have demographic growth, others do not. But we're all facing a combination of enrollment challenges, budgetary challenges, particularly for public institutions like us and like the other UW schools that have seen a decline in state support. And then we're also seeing a continued questioning of the value of a higher education degree. The public is increasingly skeptical. Many lawmakers, many employers are skeptical that the college degree, the bachelor's degree in particular, provides the value that it always has. And so when we take all those forces into account, we're seeing a lot of challenges across the higher ed landscape. I would argue that those are more acute for a public comprehensive institution like UWO, but what we've seen over the last year is that it's happening across the country, including at flagship universities like West Virginia, like the University of Arizona. Major budgetary challenges driven by some combination of those factors.
Okay, so that was going to be my second question, is what is the through line? What is the similarity between these institutions that are having difficulty? Is it size? Is it geographic location? What is the problem that these institutions that are being challenged, what are the similarities in problems that they're facing?
Yeah. Again, it varies a little bit. What we're seeing at a place like University of Arizona is very different than what we see here at Oshkosh in terms of the primary drivers. There's population growth in Arizona. There's other things that are helping in Arizona. One of the common through lines, no question, though, is the value of a college degree and people asking, as the cost of education continues to go up, some of which is driven by declining state support, why should we invest this much money, sometimes tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars in an education? For most people, this will be the biggest investment they ever make, other than probably buying a house one day. And while we believe very strongly that the long-term investment is worth it, we've got all sorts of data that show that over the course of a lifetime, those with a college degree make more financially and lead richer lives in some ways than those without a college degree. There's increasing skepticism about it, and we're seeing more and more employers, including folks in the tech sector, the Googles and the Microsofts of the world, saying that they no longer are going to require a bachelor's degree for this kind of a job, and maybe even developing their own ways of educating and training their workforce, which they used to rely on schools like us for.
Okay, so why is there then this shift amongst some people, some institutions, some industries, away from traditional higher ed institutions for training a workforce? Why is the feeling that maybe that BA is not, or that BS is not worth the money, the investment? Why do you think that's happening?
I think there's a couple different reasons, but I think we always have to start with acknowledging that higher ed hasn't always done a great job of proving and demonstrating that value. When enrollments are good and when budgets are good, I think we've been, as an industry, not as an institution, but as an industry, a little too comfortable to just coast and not innovate, not stay as responsive as we can to these larger changes that we're seeing in the world, in the economy, and as the rapid changes that we are seeing in industries driven by things like automation, by artificial intelligence, by other trends in globalization. Not all institutions of higher ed have done a great job of keeping up with those trends. And so employers are telling us, the folks that you are putting out and who are coming to work for us do not have the same skill sets that we are looking for. Now, I think there's a good argument to be had there about, do they really know what we're looking for, what they're looking for? But I think we have to acknowledge that we can do a better job of being more responsive and of giving our students who graduate from our institutions the tools and the credentials and the communication skills to go out and articulate what they can do. And employers are still going to give them a lot of that on-the-job training. So that's a big part of it. But what I don't want to, and we can maybe come back to this, the other thing I want to come back to is that one of the other things that colleges and universities do is it's not just about career preparation. It's not just about the workforce. We also help produce citizens, and that's a big part of what we do too. And right now, given where we're at as a country, it's probably more important than ever that we rededicate ourselves to that mission as well.
How long have these trends been on the horizon? We're in the middle of it now. I wouldn't say it's a trend; it's a fact.
Yeah.
So when did we start noticing lower enrollments, demographic shifts, changes in expectations, or a questioning of the value of a BA or a BS? When did that start?
The demographic shift is probably the easiest one to trace because we use that based on birth rate data and based on in-migration and out-migration for individual states. So we've known for a decade at least that this big, we call it the demographic cliff.
The cliff, yes.
The cliff has been coming, and it's worse in the Great Lakes region and the Northeast than it is in the South and the West. But we've known that for a while. We've had the demographics, we've had the data. We knew it wasn't a blip. We knew it was a longer-term trend, and we now know that it's been made worse by the pandemic. And so the birth rates in a lot of these states are continuing to decline. So this is something that we're living with not just for the next 5 years or 10 years, but this is generational now. This is 20 to 25 years where that demographic decline is going to continue. Does that open up possibilities to expand the pie and make sure we're making colleges and universities more accessible to other populations? Yes, but the demographic decline is real and it cuts across a lot of different groups. So we've known about that for a while. Some of these other trends are a little bit more recent. Some of the things that we're seeing with automation and artificial intelligence have certainly been building for a while, but I would argue that they've accelerated significantly over the last 5 to 10 years, and certainly with artificial intelligence. I mean, the exponential growth just in the last 2 to 3 years and the mainstreaming of that technology is disrupting a number of different industries, and I would include higher ed in that.
So new tech, that's one thing, but we've seen trends in terms of enrollment and enrollment decline for a decade. The Wisconsin, for instance, our birth rate here has been on a steady decline for the last 20 years. If we know that, then why didn't we make changes before now?
It's a good question. I think partly we haven't known exactly what to do or how to respond to it. I think as in general, colleges and universities are small c conservative by nature. We are universities, we are institutions that are steeped in tradition, that build on long histories of our academic practices and our disciplines. We are not known for being a rapidly changing, innovative environment. Doesn't mean there aren't pockets of that exist, but across the field, across the industry, that's not our strength. Nobody looks at higher ed and says, that's a fast-moving, innovative space, the way they talk about other fields. So I think most of it is institutional inertia. It's also a little bit hard to know what to do given the political environment that we're operating in, when it ties very much to that question about the value of a higher ed degree. I don't think you can really separate those two. That's a big part of it. So we're trying on the one hand to convince people of the value of what we do while acknowledging that we have to change fundamentally kind of how we do what we do. And you have to be able to do those things together and articulate that to a skeptical public. And that's not an easy thing to do.
You're listening to UWO Now. I'm Wendell Ray, and we're talking about trends in higher education with Ed Martini, Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at UWO-Oshkosh. Why is it that the upper Midwest and certain other regions of the nation are experiencing this issue or these issues more so than others? Because not every university is cutting back. Not every university is having to cut staff. Why is it then that these trends are affecting schools in the upper Midwest and other regions that you mentioned earlier?
So again, a lot of it is demographics, and I'm not one to say that demographics is destiny, but we have known for a long time that the birth rate and the outmigration in New England and then across the Rust Belt through the Great Lakes region is significantly worse. You look at the population growth that you're seeing in places like Texas, Colorado, Arizona, California is off the charts. They have different kinds of problems with their universities in terms of how can we serve all these students. Whereas our decline is really we are an aging state and we are an aging region. And so not only do we see fewer and fewer high school age students coming in for that traditional market, we also see an aging public that, generally speaking, politically doesn't want to invest in education, whether that's in the K-12 space or the higher ed space. So it's a combination of those two where the demographics drive both the enrollment trends that we're seeing in higher ed, but also some sense of the political priorities where they're arguing for things that are more closely related to, let's say, healthcare and infrastructure and prescription drug costs, maybe more so than investing in the K-12 pipeline, which needs a lot of support as well, or higher ed.
So tell us a little bit about you and how you got to UWO. What's your background and what's your path to this university?
Sure. So I'm a historian by training. I went to grad school. I went right into grad school for my undergrad. I always wanted to be a history teacher. I fell in love with college, with higher education as an undergrad student. Went right into grad school and really never looked back. I love being on a college campus. I love the exchange of ideas. I love writing, thinking, teaching. I love all the different aspects of higher ed. And so went right through to grad school and I got my first full-time tenure-track job at Western Michigan University across the Big Lake in Kalamazoo, and spent a great 18 years there as a faculty member, as a department chair, as an associate dean, vice provost, and really focused a lot of my work on that teaching and learning mission and on the worlds of online and continuing ed as well. So I spent a lot of time doing program development, but spent time thinking about how we could operate in more kind of innovative, forward-thinking spaces. What can we do with continuing ed, adult education, online education to help expand that pie? The demographics in Michigan are actually even worse than Wisconsin's when we look at the high school rate and the birth rate. And so we really tried to see where we could compete, where we could strategically position ourselves with online programs. And we're doing some of that work now here at UWO, because part of the response to declining demographics and the decline of the traditional 18 to 19-year-old demographic is to expand those opportunities for folks who are going right into the workforce and coming back and realizing either now or a few years down the road as the economy shifts, how can I come back and upskill to get training, maybe to take some more classes, maybe to get another credential or a degree. So I've spent time on both the very kind of traditional academic side of the house as well as the more outward-facing innovation side of the house, and really try to bring those two sides together in my work as provost here.
At your last stop, you had challenges at that university. Tell us about what happened there and what you did to meet those challenges.
Yeah, so we did some restructuring there. We did some reorganization. We rethought our adult and continuing ed unit, which was a very traditionally oriented unit, to be more of an academic innovation unit, to really drive innovations both in the classroom and on the program side. So we stood up an entirely internal market research unit that helped us identify some of these trends that we were seeing in the field, nationally, regionally, locally, that would help drive decision making about what kind of new programs we might want to invest in. So cybersecurity is a good example there. Like, it was a big, hot, emerging field. We were just a little bit ahead of the game on that prior to the pandemic and prior to the explosion of cybersecurity programs, in part because we were doing that market research. So we looked at program innovation. We did some reorganization. We went through some really painful budget cuts and staff reductions, most of those during the pandemic, but had seen similar kinds of enrollment declines that we really had to answer. So that was a big part of it. You know, at Western Michigan University, we were fortunate that we had a massive gift, $550 million, the biggest gift ever given to a public institution. That helped us invest in a few areas and help maybe us stay ahead of the curve a little bit. So that was a great gift, a lot of generosity from donors, which made a difference. But we still had to innovate in some of these spaces to figure out how we could get faster and ultimately more responsive to this external environment.
You're listening to UWO Now. I'm Wendell Ray, and we're talking today about trends and challenges in higher education with Ed Martini, Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at UWO. This is your first year here, correct?
Correct, yeah. I'm in month 7, I think.
So tell me why you decided to come here, considering that we had some challenges when you walked through the door.
Sure. Number one reason is that I am a passionate advocate for public higher education. Aside from my undergraduate degree, everything else that I've done in my life has been public schools, public universities. And I believe very strongly in the access mission that we have here at UWO. And what I saw when I began exploring and learning about UWO was an institution that was very much rooted in place here in Northeast Wisconsin, that had a mission and a vision that was very much tied to the Valley, tied to students, employers, to the region. And yeah, had some hard choices ahead of it, but these are things, again, that are happening all across higher education. And it's incumbent upon us as institutions to lean into those, to take those head on, and to ultimately do what we can to make the changes we need to preserve these institutions so that they can continue to be that provider of talent, of access, of education for the long haul.
You're listening to UWO Now. I'm your host, Wendell Ray. We're talking today with Ed Martini, who is Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at UW-Oshkosh. You know, there are times in my classroom where I'll ask a student, or ask all of my students, well, how do you get your information? And never is it, you know, I heard it here or I watched it on network television. It's always, it's something that I got from my feed on my phone, or I watched it on YouTube, I saw it on TikTok, I saw it on Twitter. It is not what we would call the traditional media. So how then do you begin to train students who are clearly different than you and I were when we first were in college and got our information and shared information and disseminated information in a different way?
Absolutely. What students across the board are telling us is they want information and education on demand, just like they get their entertainment. They want services on demand, just like they get their services on their phones. And so we need to be responsive. We need to meet them where they are, and we need to figure out what channels to best engage them on. So that can be helping them make an appointment with an advisor and being able to do that really seamlessly on their phone and get them answers to the questions they want when they want it, which might also be at 2 to 3 in the morning when we don't have staff on call, but maybe our chatbot can help them get that answer and connect them with an appointment the next day when they need to see an actual person. And then when it comes to the actual educational mission, this is absolutely why we're seeing more students engage in things like YouTube and Khan Academy and Duolingo and all these different things. There's a lot of different ways now for people to get that information. It's not the same as a college education. There are aspects of that are different, but increasingly people are turning towards that for that just-in-time training, that just-in-time information on demand, how they want it, when they want it. So we've got to be able to incorporate elements of that. Doesn't mean we have to go full scale in that direction, but where we can provide some of those just-in-time services and be faster, be more responsive on the channels that students are looking for, it can help keep them engaged in ways where we can continue to do some of the things that we do that are not in that same kind of approach.
So then what are the challenges in meeting that with the current assets that you have? Assets being infrastructure, buildings, as well as your teaching staff.
Yeah. We are not built to pivot on a dime. We are not those kinds of institutions. We take years usually to make decisions. We take years to develop new academic programs. So part of it is that we've got to get faster. We've got to be willing to make faster decisions. They should be data-driven. They should be strategic, but we've got to be able to think about how we can move things faster. The other thing we've got to recognize, though, is that especially when we're talking about adult learners who might be coming back for education and what this might look like going forward for even young people now, 18 to 19-year-olds who are going right into that workforce, but might come back when unemployment isn't at 3%, or might come back when the robots come for their jobs. We can provide a lot of our expertise and a lot of our information in ways that's not credit-based. Not everybody's looking for a second degree or a master's degree. Not everybody's looking for a class or even a set of classes. A lot of times they're just looking for that information. So we can deliver non-credit programming. We can deliver non-credit certificates, badges, some of these kind of things that are helping our students get what they want, including the next step in their career, helping our employers get the workforce that they're looking for. And it can still be a revenue generator for us. The money's still green that's coming in through those kind of programs in the same way it is through tuition. But that should be an important part of our portfolio going forward to balance out that segment of the market that's looking for that kind of an approach.
Are we talking about continuing education kind of courses or some new look CE?
Yep. Yeah, it can be on demand. It can be webinars. It can be some of it we give away for free to whet the appetite. It can be customized trainings for particular companies, for particular industries. We can partner with manufacturers in the Valley who don't want to send all their students, all their workers back for a master's degree or a bachelor's degree or a cert, but are still looking for our expertise when it comes to things like supply chain or accounting or rural telehealth care for our nursing program. It doesn't always have to be packaged in a way that we are most comfortable with as degrees and courses. It's information and it's training that can be relevant to our different stakeholders, and it can still be a revenue generator for us as an institution.
So it may not be a classroom setting. It may just be a series of instructional videos.
It might be online. It might be modules that we can do that we might build even for an online class that's for credit. But then we build that content and we strategically kind of unbundle it and rebundle it for different audiences. We package it, we promote it for different audiences. Maybe we tie formal assessments and exams to it. Maybe we don't. But we can package that in a lot of different ways that meet the needs of different audiences. But if we build them smartly, we can still really be efficient on our side of the operation.
And when we say we, I want to make sure that we're talking about institutions across the country that are facing these challenges and are needing to redesign, rethink their approach to educating students. We're not just talking about what we're doing here at UWO, correct?
Correct. Yeah, the same conversations are going on at a lot of different higher ed institutions. Again, especially I think at public comprehensive universities that have this access mission, that have kind of online and continuing ed type units and are engaged with communities and employers.
And is this what you were doing at your last stop?
Absolutely.
And how did that go?
I think we were making some great progress. We stood up some innovative programs that ended up being areas for growth and revenue. We redesigned our online education unit to, I think, be far more responsive. We were out in front of a lot of stuff related to artificial intelligence and what it meant for the world at large, but also for higher ed. So there's some lessons there that I think I've tried to bring with me, but those same solutions aren't necessarily the same ones for UWO. Big picture, some of the same strategies, but we've got to make it relevant to UWO in Northeast Wisconsin.
Okay, so you've talked about it a couple of times, and let's kind of dig a little bit deeper into that when we're talking about the future of education, AI, robots, as you said, coming for your job.
Yep.
How then do we train this new workforce, these new students, on an area that is developing as we're speaking on this program?
Yeah. I think number one is we engage with it. We don't react out of fear. We don't ban it. We don't try to say students don't engage with artificial intelligence, don't engage with ChatGPT. Now, doesn't mean they can just use it for whatever they want, but we have existing ways to deal with cheating and academic integrity and those kind of things. But we ignore that at our own peril. The world that our students are going to live in is going to have AI all over the place. We don't have to like it, but we've got to recognize that that's the future. So we've got to develop students who know how to work with it. And that just doesn't mean computer coding and cybersecurity. That means our humanities programs. What are the ethics of this? What are the philosophical underpinnings? What is intelligence? What's the nature of intelligence? Where are our linguists and our English professors working with students to talk about prompt generation and how to understand the language behind these large language models? My last place, we stood up a class on prompt generation and teaching students how to interact effectively with these things. So whether you're going into nursing or marketing or business, or whether you're still exploring your careers, developing some familiarity with the technology and how to interact with it is only going to become more relevant to your future as a worker, as a citizen, and as a member of society.
Let's talk about admissions. So as these new students come along, they're different than students 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly 15 or 20 years ago. How does admissions have to change to attract and get these students to come to a four-year institution?
Great question. So there's a couple different ways that admissions is and has to keep changing. One is we've got to, again, understand where students are getting their information. Most of us my age are not particularly prolific on things like TikTok and some of the other channels, Twitch and places where students are. But that's where they're getting a lot of their information. TikTok has become a news source for a lot of these students, far more than some of the more now traditional social media that some of us at a certain age are more familiar with. So we have to engage with them in a way that makes sense. They're also looking for authentic, programming on that channel. So doing more peer-to-peer communication, I think, can help us quite a bit there. But we also have to understand that their decision-making process is going to be different. Students are slower to make decisions. It's a big commitment for them. They're asking a lot of questions, again, about the value of higher education. So we've got to continue to be responsive and relevant to them in terms of how we interact with them as prospective students, as prospective customers, but also really find new ways to talk about the value of our programs and the value proposition of higher education in general, independent of us as a particular institution.
Change is not easy for anyone, a business, a family, let alone an institution. I want to talk about the challenges of making these types of adjustments in just a second, but we're going to have to stop now on 90.3. But to hear the rest of our conversation, listen to our podcast. Today's episode will be available soon on major platforms. You can also get this program by going to the UWO YouTube page and watch today's episode as well as past episodes of UWO Now. I'm Wendell Ray. Thanks for listening. Okay, so we've got change. Change is difficult for anyone. Mm-hmm. A family, a business, an institution has got to be a major challenge to get everyone on board to change. How have you approached this change philosophy at your last institution and here?
I think first and foremost, trying to lay out a vision and focus on the why. We're not just changing for change's sake. We are changing in response to a very particular set of conditions that threaten our institution and our industry in general in higher education. All those things that we talked about at the beginning, those are real threats. And when we look at the combination of those things, when they come together in a perfect storm, as they have here in Wisconsin, they're very much an existential threat to the university. So we need to be able to answer the question of why we are changing, but also why UWO should continue to exist as an institution. Paint a compelling vision of it for our internal stakeholders as well as for the public. So number one is that vision. And then number two is laying out the strategies about how we're going to get from point A to point B, getting some buy-in for that. And then I think clear and consistent communication, even if it sounds like over communication. A lot of times I feel like I'm talking too much and I'm saying the same things over and over, but a lot of folks need to keep hearing it over and over. And change is hard. And again, we're not an institution or an industry that's built for change necessarily, but we don't really have any choice right now. We've got to dig in and recognize that not only do we have to change right now, but that change is going to be our new normal. We have to build structures that are going to allow us to continue it, to adapt for the next couple generations. Because
And
the trends are
how do you make an institution more nimble?
more nimble. So I think there are ways that we can improve our internal processes. We can be less deliberative. We can move things along. That doesn't mean reckless decision making, still informed by data, still strategic, still informed by shared governance procedures. But we've got to have an urgency to act and get people on board with the urgency. And for some of this stuff, we can get out of our own way. Some of it might be as easy as the way that we schedule classes. Right now at UWO, we have a lot of very manual processes that are not efficient, but also I think frustrating for a lot of folks. There's ways that we can automate and rethink what we do behind the scenes in some very fundamental ways that will allow us to be faster, more responsive. But part of it is also, again, rethinking how we might deliver education to different segments of the market going forward.
You said one of the things that you wanted to emphasize about the importance of a higher education is that you're also helping develop a citizen. What do you mean by that?
So we talk a lot about career readiness here, and we do a great job with it. We talk about being the workforce and talent solution for Northeast Wisconsin, and we do a great job of that. But especially, again, at public comprehensive institutions that have an access mission, we're also training the next generation of citizens. And a lot of times I think people think that our kind of core liberal arts, liberal education mission is at odds with career readiness. And I want to keep arguing that, in fact, they're one and the same. That what we do in our classes where we teach students critical thinking, where we teach them how to write and how to think and how to make arguments, how to understand various perspectives on a problem, how to work with people from different backgrounds who have different perspectives. Those are the kind of things we need more than ever in our citizenry, where we are more divided than ever as a country. They're also the same things that employers are constantly telling us that they're looking for. Those same skills, I think, are actually complementary in terms of what we're looking for citizens and what employers are looking for as well.
So employers are saying, hey, we need a more a workforce that's a little less rigid in their thinking?
Yeah, and that can continue to learn how to learn, because the rate of change that they're seeing in their industries and their fields is just as much as we're seeing in higher ed. So those jobs are going to change. The workforce is going to change. But if we can help create students who can think, react, adapt, and adjust and be agile, be nimble, they're going to continue to grow with their employers too. So those skill sets, I think, are one and the same.
Okay, and developing that type of curriculum and that approach to making students critical thinkers and having the ability to adapt and change, that seems to be the challenge of the future. But I want to thank you very much. Maybe we'll have you back and see how things are going with some of the adjustments being made here. But I want to thank you so much for coming by and talking to us today on UWO Now.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to UWO Now. Remember to catch the latest episode of UWO Now. Go to our website, wrst.org, and you can also watch us on the UWO YouTube page. I'm Wendell Ray. Thanks so much for listening.